All right, we are back. You guys know we are serious about audio when we're here broadcasting right before Christmas Eve. I dragged James Larson here almost at the stroke of midnight. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good.
Well, we want to talk speakers. Man, you kind of surprised me at the end of the year with these new Polk R700s you got here. Um, Unfortunately, we didn't have the review published before we did the Product of the Year Awards, but after reading your review and talking to you about these speakers, these could very well be a contender for the 2022 Budget Tower Speaker Award. What do you think about that, James?
I think they could be a contender, but there's a whole nother year of good speakers to come, so maybe there's something even better. But these are really darn good, and they'll put up stiff competition against anything in the price point, I'm sure.
Yeah, the measurements look great on them. I know we've reviewed what that bookshelf, the Legend series this year or last year. You were really impressed with those, and this has the same kind of engineering chops. The same guy, Scott Orth,
Worth.
behind these new speaker lines that have been really fantastic. I mean, they've turned Polk around, in my opinion, because in the past, when I used to look at some of the Polk speakers that were sold at this department stores like Circuit City, they were always kind of really bright sounding to me, and they just had a department store kind of sound for speakers. But these are totally different league. I mean, this is some serious engineering that's going on here. Don't they have a Kipple? I thought they had one of those measurement systems now that they're using at Polk. I could be
I,
wrong, but I thought they did.
sure. Well, if you're talking about the near field scanner, I read something somewhere that they did now. I don't know for sure, but I mean every loudspeaker manufacturer uses clipple machines. So like to at least design the drivers, if not, test the entire speaker. I think they do. I don't think they had a confident anechoic chamber before, so they didn't really need it. They didn't really inhibit them from making a good loudspeaker. And they have made really good loudspeakers in the past. So like the Clipple machine, like the Clipple NFS, the near field scanner, just makes it easier for them to
Yeah.
test speakers on the fly rather than having to drag them to an anechoic chamber.
Or put them up on a pole.
Yeah,
Um, I want you to kind of show off the speakers a little bit before we get into the slide presentation. So I see them behind you,
sure.
side by side.
So yeah,
So it's got the ring radiator tweeter. It's got the turbine kind of cone shape. That's to strengthen the cone and make it stiffer, right?
yeah, yeah, supposedly. I think it works pretty well. So that's what the claim is, that makes it stiffer. It reduces uh you know uh deformation at higher frequencies. So yeah, I think it works very well. But we'll see how well it works in the measurements. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Well, here we go. Let's take a look at the slide presentation that you put forth here. You kind of faulted them for not having a real wood veneer finish, but I think that vinyl finish kind of looks really authentic. I don't know. I don't have them in person. I know you have them right there with you. What do you say about that? Because it looks great in the pictures.
I think it does look good. I didn't even fault them for it, really. I mean, I just noted that the veneer wasn't real wood, but it's a really good imitation, and to use a real wood veneer would hike up the price of these considerably. And so it's a pretty good veneer. And no, I don't fault them for it. I think I think they pulled it off pretty well. So
What was
yeah,
the retail price on these?
I think 1,100 each, but right now they're on sale for 900 each. So yeah, 1,100. You're looking at like 2,200 for a pair normally, MSRP.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm
So
just putting that here for people to note. I think I put a direct link to our Amazon affiliate store down below if you guys are interested in buying these. Full disclosure, we make like a 1 or 2% commission. It's not going to like buy us a new car or anything like that, but every little bit helps out and gets us to keep doing these reviews.
I think
So
the
just,
sale price is 899. I think right now.
oh, okay.
I
Yeah, so
think,
they're under 2 grand a pair, basically.
yeah, yeah. That's your killer deal for the money. As well, we'll see. As we go into the show.
And those are two 8-inch woofers for the bass drivers or sevens.
Those are eights,
Okay, so then the mid range is a 6.5 or 5.25.
6.5.
Oh, so you got good sensitivity with having such large drivers like that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's probably a little bit above average for this class. It's not just the drivers; it's the size of the cabinet. These are big speakers for their class, you know. So
Yeah, didn't you say they weigh about 80 pounds a piece?
yeah, I think they're closing in on 80. They are not easy to pick up and move around,
Right.
even among like their peers. So like, yeah, it's a lot of speaker for the money, both you know, both in performance and in sheer physical mass.
I gotcha. All right, well, let's move on and see what you got here. Oh, here's the specs. I didn't have to guess it. There you go.
Yeah. So,
So the Pinnacle ring radiator, is that the Vifa ring radiator or is it their own design?
I think it's their own design, but I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it's their own,
Uh-huh.
but they've used this design in the past, the back in the LSI speakers and maybe before then. And it's a nice tweeter. You know, it's not perfect as we'll see, but
Yeah.
it's pretty cool for what it does.
Wow. So you got some pretty impressive specs here. You got real bass extension to 3 dB point down to 38 hertz. That's good. I mean, for a mid-price tower like this, I mean, that's pretty decent
Mm,
bass extension.
I don't think it quite does that in my testing. It's not what I see in like you know ground plane setting, but it
Uh-huh.
in room you would definitely see that or better than that. You know, so I
Right.
don't I don't really think that's quite anechoic, but they might have a different way of measuring the low frequency response than I do, and they might it's probably a valid number for their measurement technique.
Sure. Yeah, and that really matters too. And how, I mean, there's some companies that do 1/8 space measurements for their sensitivity ratings. At
Yeah,
least they're not doing that. They're
yeah, like
giving.
we won't mention any names, but one starts with a K and it rhymes with lips. So yeah,
Yeah. Wow. All right. So cool. So you got two finish options, black or walnut. We obviously have the walnut finish. The
the
black
walnut's the one to
is
get.
the black a gloss or a flat black?
Oh, it's flat. It's not even a matte black. I think it's that textured vinyl black that we see in a lot of cheap speakers, right? It looks fine. If you want your speaker to disappear in room, it's fine, but it's the walnut's definitely the better finish, you know. So
So, question for you that just came up in here. I'm kind of wondering. You've had this speaker in house, and you've had the Arundel Sound. I obviously had the bookshelf version, but how do you think they compare? Are they totally different speakers, or do you think they would be more similar than different?
there are different speakers. Um, the monitors, well, obviously those are stand mounts. Um, how do I want to compare them? They might be the Arundel sound speakers might be a bit more sensitive, but I don't know that they would necessarily have more output capability like headroom.
Yeah.
I would trust that the Polks would have deeper like bass, more bass headroom, right?
Well, you're talking about on the bookshelf one, but I guess he's asking about the 1723
Oh,
tower.
you specified the monitors though.
Oh, well, you're right, because that is about they're about 2,500 bucks the monitors for a pair, right?
Yeah, I would say it's like it depends on your usage exactly. I would say if you're not gonna have a subwoofer, get the Polks. If you
Yeah.
are, get the Arundels. I mean, and even then, there's other considerations. It's like it's almost too much to get into here.
Yeah,
They're
but
both great
basically
speakers.
the Polks can sit on their own as a two-channel system without having a sub, but
Oh, very much so. I
yeah,
mean, so can the Arundels for that matter. They have surprisingly good deep bass extension and headroom, but just not as much as the Polks.
right.
So yeah, in this slide here's like a cutaway view of the cabinet. Um, really good beefy cabinet. You know, like the spec said, 79 pounds, and it ain't no joke. These are heavy duty speakers, probably the heaviest duty in their price class that I've seen so far. Right.
Yeah.
One
Well,
thing that
they really thickened up that front baffle. If you look below the woofer, is that like layers of MDF?
I doubt that is that's like pure thickness because that would make it extremely heavy. But I mean,
Right.
it's a very inert cabinet. One thing to note about this slide is the mid-range driver gets its own enclosed
Yep.
compartment there. And all this cabinetry, it's not just like, well, we'll just put a brace here and we'll put a brace there. It's just done by like, you know, FEA analysis and what stiffens the cabinet the most. You know, where can we get the most bang for the buck in terms of bracing? You know, and
And the thing too is like on budget speakers, I've seen cutouts of budget speakers and they give you like this really cheap plastic cup for the mid-range. This is actually its own enclosure. It's like it's fully MDF enclosed, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't get to take a peek inside the cabinet, so I can't like. I think that's accurate though. That's an accurate depiction of what's going on inside the cabinet. So yeah, it
Yeah,
looks to be real MDF
pretty
enclosure for the.
killer. And that port, what's up with that port with that extra little tube?
The export or the power port 2.0, we'll get into that. That's like its own kind of deserves its own
Yeah.
discussion. But yeah,
Okay.
it's doing very interesting things with the port, the Reserve R700s. Okay, there they are with the grills on. I think the grills are a little bit drab, right? They're fine. They're fine if you want to hide the
Yeah,
speakers.
yeah. They're not like they don't dress the speaker up, in other words.
Yeah, they just hide the drivers, and if sometimes you need to do that, in some circumstances. So that's what they look like with the grills on. Then there's a picture of the binding posts. It's not the fanciest binding post, but that doesn't like inhibit performance at all.
They're
One thing,
actually they're pretty nice from what I see.
yeah, they're fine. They work. You notice they're biampable, and
Yep.
you can almost make a justification for these speakers being biamped, right? Because there's two pretty beefy 8-inch bass drivers, right? And that can
Yeah.
take quite a bit of power. And if you had the right amplifiers, you could like me on a lot of like home audio speakers. I say, why would you biamp these? Why? There's just no. If you got
Yep.
like these, I think the case is almost there. I don't think it's kind of up in the air, but is it worth to buy amps? I think they could take more power than a regular AVR could give.
Mhm.
So
Well,
I
and
don't.
if you bought like an 11 channel AVR and you're only using 7 of the channels, it might make sense to biamp them,
You could
especially for 2-channel listening. You get
even
that
then
extra
the
headroom.
power draw would be the same though from the amplifier. So it doesn't. There's not really a. I wouldn't think there's a headroom advantage if you're using
Well,
the
there
same.
would be if with only 4 channels driven, because I've seen you still with a lot of the flagship receivers, you'll still get full rated power up to about 5 or 6 channels driven. So
Okay, sure.
potentially, if you're listening to 2-channel, it could make a difference.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I normally I would say most people just use one amp, but there might be a case for these particular speakers that if you had the right setup, then yeah, it might benefit from that extra power.
So pretty nice woofers. Are those aluminum? The
They
cones?
look aluminum, don't they? But they're actually polypropylene.
Oh, okay.
I thought they were aluminum myself. But it just looks aluminum. It's not. I mean,
Well, it's got a pretty beefy roll on it, so they must have some good throw.
yeah, they're pretty beefy 8-inch woofers. So like, yeah, I mean that's why you could actually almost justify biamping these if you wanted to or you were inclined to. So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's just a close up of the woofers there to get you a better sense of how it looks. Yeah, you can
Now
go
the
to.
position when you're sitting down, is the tweeter, above your level, or is it about at the right height?
It really depends on your ear level, right?
Yeah.
So like some people, like I used to have lower seating than I do now, and I would have been considerably below the tweeter level. Right now, I'm a little bit below. I think that the tweeter is probably a little bit higher than people normally sit, but when we go into the vertical measurements that I took of this, Polk did a really cool thing to adjust that. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay,
There it is, the
yeah,
driver's
close up of the ring radiator tweeter and the turbine woofer or mid-range driver. What's really cool, like for those who don't understand, like who don't know the difference between a ring radiator and your typical dome, I would want to kind of explain it real fast. So in your typical dome, you have the former, the voice coil wraps around the former, and it's capped on that cap is capped by a stiff dome. It might be like aluminum, right?
Mhm.
Some metal or stiff like fabric, right? A stiffened fabric, and then it would connect to the frame by a wee little surround, right? That
Yep.
allows it to flex. Uh, uh, ring radiator is very different. And a ring radiator, the whole like interfacing with like the air, the transducer part is the surround. There is no like dome, right? So if you see that like divot around the kind of domish part, right?
Yeah.
That's where the former connects to the what you want to call the surround or the diaphragm, right? We'll just call it the diaphragm of the tweeter. And so the center, see that phase plug looking thing, right? That's a fixed phase plug, and
Yep.
what it really does is really holding the inner part of the diaphragm. So the surround in a ring radiator tweeter is the like the uh, the diaphragm that interacts with the air, right? That generates those SPLs, you know. So there's no like stiff like no, like a dome part that throws air around. It's like the surround itself, and it's interesting. It gives it a larger bandwidth than what you'd normally have, and it has its advantages, you know. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty neat thing what it does. You know, uh, it does have some like I don't know. You might call them disadvantages or there's a trade-off, you know, in everything in loudspeakers now. It's what the radiation pattern is a little bit constricted compared to normal dome tweeters, but we'll get into that. But anyways, it's a good tweeter. It plays way up there, you know, way up. I don't know the spec of what 30, 40 kilohertz or something like that, right? Way
Hmm.
above human hearing. There's no um like modes of what do you call that? The names.
Breakup modes.
Yeah, breakup modes. The breakup
Yeah.
modes are way up there compared to normal dome tweeters.
Which is good. You want the breakup mode out of the audio bin if you can, and that's why these companies use, exotic materials like magnesium or sometimes beryllium, because those have very high breakup modes when you mix those two metals.
Sure, and this has the same kind of quality. This doesn't have breakup modes until way, way up there because it's a very soft diaphragm, and the way it's moving versus the air is
Mhm.
it's
Someone says it looks like a Hershey Kiss. That's the first thing I thought when I first saw that tweeter. I'm like, it does look like a Hershey Kiss. So that's a good thing if you're a chocolate lover.
it's not that little like pole piece, right? That kind of like phase plug looking thing is actually pretty stiff. I mean, it's not you can flick your finger at it, and it's a fixed part of the tweeter, so it's not
Yeah.
as fragile as what you'd think, you know.
Yep. And I really find the geometry of the mid-range interesting because you see many companies, for example, Harman uses their ceramic coating driver to help
Yeah,
deal with the breakup modes of the aluminum.
it's really
Um,
just what do you call it? Anodized aluminum, the
yeah,
ceramic,
yeah.
right? It's not the
Mono
ceramic is not doing a whole heck of a lot for those drivers. It's an aluminum driver, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But monitor audio, I've seen on their drivers, they put little dimples on the drivers to increase the stiffness or rigidity of the driver. So I've seen that. I've never seen a turbine kind of look like that. And I was talking to my brother, who's really proficient with a finite element analysis as a mechanical engineer. And he said, yeah, that's a really good technique for stiffening the cone. So it's not a gimmick. I mean, people look at that and say, oh, this must be some weird gimmick. So they put their stamp on the cone. There's real science to why they did that.
I think that you're right, and I included in this slideshow. I mean, I always take them, but I included near field
A near field
measurements.
measurement of the
Yeah,
driver.
and this driver works. It's whatever they're doing. I mean, it works well. So like,
Yeah.
it's a good driver. I mean, I don't know how much of it is due to the shape of the mid-range driver, but it's a good driver. That's what I can tell you.
Yeah, it's cool. Oh, there's the port.
Yeah, here's a kind of a close-up of the port. This so Polk in the past, like in the Legend series, they had their power port, and it would have kind of a shaped tube almost going into the port, almost. But in previous generations of this power port, it was kind of like a cone that almost went into the port but didn't quite. And this PowerPoint 2.0 version is this tube that goes all the way in the port, and it has these things, the structure in it that addresses the port resonance is like unwanted port resonance. So the entire
Mhm.
port is creating resonance, of course, and that's what you want, the first resonance of the port. But it also creates like secondary resonances, you know, harmonics, right? That you don't want, right? And so in the past, this power port design was just meant to alleviate port chuffing, right? The air turbulence in the port so that it wouldn't make, you know, chuffing noises. And but the power port, this export thing they call the export. They have all these, you know, names, trademark names for this stuff. It not just addresses the turbulence, it addresses the secondary, you know, unwanted harmonics that ports can create. And
So this wouldn't really be applicable to a subwoofer. It's really applicable to a full range speaker with bass, right?
I wonder if you could use this for a subwoofer. I think that I don't think it would really benefit that much, but
Yeah.
maybe in some technical sense, because a subwoofer, the port in a subwoofer, like in a speaker, you just want that first resonance. but you don't want the harmonics, so like it shouldn't be this is not needed in subwoofers, but maybe in some technical way they could benefit from it.
I
But
just asked because I don't see any of their subwoofers having this technology in it, so I'm just wondering if it's more of a full bandwidth kind of thing.
yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to see. I think this technology is actually doing something, and it's not just a trademarked thing to help sell a speaker, not just a marketing gimmick, right? It is doing, as we'll see in the near field measurements. But yeah, it's interesting, and it's and what's the interesting thing is this is this new technology on the reserve speakers. It's not on their higher end Legend speakers. So this is developed, after the Legend speaker. So the port technology on
Newer
this
tech.
speaker is better than what you see on the higher end Legend series. So that's pretty cool.
So does that port, that bottom plastic piece, does that come already installed on the speaker, or do you have to install that after you take it out of the
I
box?
think you install the feet, but I think it's not plastic, by the way. That is a heavy metal piece.
Oh, that's metal?
Oh, that's solid metal. Yeah, that's like
Oh,
iron
wow.
or steel or something. It is heavy, and it really weights the speaker down right. Gives it a really solid bottom mass. So, yeah,
Here's
I,
a
I
good question for you, James. Does it touch the ground, or does it hover above the ground because of the spikes?
the spikes give it clearance from the ground. Yeah,
Okay.
it's just not touching it does not rest on the ground. And those spikes are metal pieces too, so there's rubbery pieces you can also use if you didn't want to use spikes on, say, hard flooring. So yeah, I mean everything here is well thought out.
I saw a demo that Polk had on their website. They had another speaker from another company, and they were showing how the port was chuffing on it. And then they put this on, and they showed there was no chuffing sounds. They were doing it in an anechoic chamber. So it must
Yeah,
be doing, like you said, and we'll see it in your measurements as well. I find it very fascinating because I like to see when companies come up with something innovative like this and to address those kind of issues. And it and actually looks cool. I didn't know that was metal. That's impressive because that costs some money to machine that.
oh, for sure. Well, it's probably not machined, but like a mold, like a
Oh,
cast.
okay.
It's cast. It's a cast mold. So yeah, I'm sure it's not. And so this is like I'll lead into the measurements. This is how people know I measured the speaker
Yep.
outdoors. It's propped up there. The mic is at about a 7.5 foot height, or maybe a little taller, like roughly maybe, because this is a taller speaker. It might have been at 8 feet. I don't
Beautiful
exactly.
scenery, man. God, what a day you tested this on.
Yeah, it was a nice day. I don't test in bad days. I try not to. So yeah, I can't test in the rain really.
So just to get people to understand what you're doing here, you're propping the speaker up off the ground, and then you're turning it on a platform every 5 or 10 degree increments to take more measurements, right?
I try to do 5 degree increments. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see in this picture, but in other pictures you can see that the speaker's on top of a ladder. It's on top of this platform that's on top of a ladder. Ladder isn't. Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be hard, but the ladder is like it's a folding ladder, and the ladder is only like a 4.5 to 5 foot height, right? And I use another ladder to hike the speaker up there, and then there's a turntable on there that I can spin in 5 degree increments.
Right.
So everything works. It's as good as an anechoic chamber down to a certain frequency.
Yeah, like a
And
couple of 100 hertz.
yeah, like you start seeing effects out to like say 400 hertz, but below like 200 it gets really severe. But I can window that out. I can what you s- I can eliminate the reflections that get in the measurements by using techniques that, well, it's too much to get into here, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I can make these anechoic for our intents here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's awesome.
Okay,
All
yeah,
right.
the waterfall response is kind of a 3D view to give people context for the profile, the 2D view, and you can see nice and smooth at all the way up to there is some beaming there above
After
like 10.
10 kilohertz.
Yeah, but that, doesn't matter too much, right?
Yeah.
But it's really nice, smooth directivity, nice, good correlation to the flat on-axis response, off-axis response bears good correlation to that. And
So
so,
if they would have put a waveguide on this, do you think there would have been less beaming, or or is that just a
yes,
function? Yeah,
there would have
yeah,
been less beaming, but Waveguides, it changes the directivity of the tweeter through, throughout its entire passband, right?
Yeah.
So like it might have caused problems. It would have probably had you would have to redesign the way it interacts with the mids if you wanted to put it on waveguide, right? But yeah, it would have had a broader dispersion at higher frequencies.
Right.
I'm not bothered by the beaming. I mean, so like it's you could call it a flaw given that the rest of the range isn't beaming, and here
Yeah,
the
it's so
upper.
smooth and even. It's incredible.
Yeah, but it's not too bad of a flaw. It's not. It doesn't. It's a really good speaker. Let's just put it that way. And that's
Mhm.
not a big issue. So here's the 2D view. Shows the same thing, but gives you an idea of how like
This is all the way out to 100 degrees? 990 plus or minus
90.
90, I
Yeah, this
believe,
is
yeah.
90 degrees. So at a right angle all the way, and it maintains really good um, correlation to the on-axis response all the way up to, you know, 90 degrees, except of course for the tweeter where, the upper treble where things get beamy a little bit, and that's not a big deal and audibly speaking.
No, because it's really far off axis when
Yeah,
you're
it's
looking
it's
at
it's
that.
far off axis. Yeah, I mean there
Yeah.
there might be some advantages to having the response being flat even at such a high frequency all the way to a far off axis angle, but and we've seen that with what those BMR towers.
Mhm.
But I don't know how much of a advantage that is. I would have to, to gauge that, I would want to like do some A/B testing to see how that it would affect the sound stage. I don't know how much though, at such a high frequency.
Yeah.
Like a polar map of the, this gives you like a top-down color. Read the review if you really want to know what all this stuff means, right?
Yeah, basically, when it's lit up like that, that's means it's producing sound, so at base frequencies, it's completely omnidirectional, and it gets more narrow as the frequencies go up.
Sure, and this is pretty good directivity. I mean, there's some wavebanding that I think is at around like 600 hertz, and the directivity is pretty well preserved up to I want to say 7 kilohertz, right, where the tweeter does start to beam,
Mhm.
and what that means is that you kind of want to be, I guess, you want to be within say 20 degrees of the on-axis response to hear the full like band, to hear the full output all the way up to the top end of human hearing, 20 kilohertz. So like but even then, if you're out even 30 degrees, you're going to hear the full range of, a pretty steady amount of output up to, 15, 16 kilohertz. That's what this graph tells you, that you kind of want to be, or you want to have the tweeter roughly pointing at you. You don't need to be right on axis though.
So if you have a couch of multiple people sitting, you probably wanna space these out pretty wide apart and then tow them in, right?
Yeah, you'd want to get a mild toe in for that sort of situation. I mean, even a 30-degree angle, right, from the on-axis response is going to give you a 60-degree angle overall, which is a pretty wide angle. So
Yeah.
it'll cover. Realistically, it's going to cover most people's listening position. You might have like a so-called mother-in-law seat way off
Yep.
to the side, but who cares?
No,
That's
that's where you always put the mother-in-law regardless.
yeah. I don't want to be dissing mother-in-law. I'm sure there's a lot of cool mother-in-laws. It's a figure of speech, people, so don't get too upset, right?
Oh, yeah, don't get hurt philioma. It's a running joke I've been doing for years.
Yeah, so
I
here
love
we've
my
got,
mother-in-law. Yeah.
yeah, mother-in-laws are cool for the most part. I'm sure there's some bad ones too, but whatever.
So
Anyway,
I'm gonna show the graph up close so you can see the roll off. This is a ground plane measurement.
yes, this is a ground plane measurement, and we
Okay,
see
so it looks like we're flat out to a 3 dB points around 40 hertz or so, right?
I would characterize it as like maybe a little bit above if you
Yeah,
really
like
wanted to be
42
strict,
maybe. Yeah.
but if you wanted to give a plus or minus 33 dB window, you might be a little bit above, but it doesn't really matter. And then here's the thing: different techniques, and like I said, different techniques and low frequency measuring will produce different results.
Yeah,
So
are you getting the port response into this measurement?
mostly yes,
Because you're
mostly.
turning the speaker on the side to do the measurement, aren't you?
You can do it that way. You can have the speaker standing up, and or you can have it for ground plane. If you had it standing up, though, it would call it would cause some reduction in the upper frequencies, right
Yeah. Yep.
here. So I try to do it as fairly as possible, and like I had it on its side. And
But if you have it on its side, the port should be hitting the ground and it's not coupling with the
it would,
ground.
yeah, it would load the ground. But then again, you have that plate that is loading the ground. It would load the ground a little bit more. And
Yeah.
so like, but so there's no right way to do this, right?
Yeah. I
So
just
like,
want people to realize that, in a room, you're going to have more bass extension than what you're showing here. You're trying to take the room out of it to show what the speaker is doing. And it's still giving you it's giving you honest bass extension down to 40 Hertz.
yeah, anechoically, this is giving you really
Yeah.
good bass extension down. And below, once you get in below 40 Hertz, you see like the roll off. That's probably a 24 dB per octave roll off
Yeah. That's what I
port,
was,
right?
well, that's a standard bass reflex. That's a standard fourth order enclosure.
So the tuning point is like around 30. I want to say in the mid 30s somewhere. The tune point always happens just a bit below that knee, the knee of the response.
Yep.
And so in room, you're gonna get really solid bass down to like 30 Hertz, even in like a largest room, right? Just put it anywhere near a surface, and you're gonna get really good bass down to 30 Hertz. So you don't need a subwoofer for this speaker.
Gotcha.
Okay. So for this graph, this is some of the. I mean, I can't do like a full vertical measurements of the speaker of my setup, right? I would have to lay it down outside and then pivot it on the tweeter axis, right? Which is not easy to do, right? With my setup. So I just hike the mic up down enough, using a little trigonometry to find the angles. What is 10 degrees? What is above and below our tweeter axis. And what's really cool here is, okay, so the middle line is the tweeter axis, and that's where all the measurements I took. That's where all the measurements I had taken from all the previous graphs that you saw. But it turns out that 10 degrees below the tweeter, which is probably closer to where most people are going to be listening to the speakers, is actually flatter than the
Yeah. It looks
on-axis response.
great. Yep.
Yeah, and that's realistically because the tweeter is a little bit high on the speaker, right? And normally that's the kind of the reference axis where you kind of want to be at. But this speaker, the flattest response happens, well, let's say you were at, I don't know, a 6 or 8 foot distance from the midwoofer, right? And you were listening on that height or a bit below, right? You're going to get a flatter response than you're listening on the tweeter, which is ideal, right? Which is the ideal for a speaker where the tweeter is a little high, right? And then I have a curve to see what happens above the tweeter, and obviously the response isn't as good as below, but nobody's going to be listening up there. I just put that there just for people to see what would happen, right? So the lesson here is it actually pays to be listening below the tweeter. The mid range is where most people in most normal situations are going to be listening to anyway. So this is pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah. It looks great.
I wish more speakers would do this.
Yep.
Okay, now me and Gene kind of had a little disagreement about this one slide, right? He thinks, okay, this is the comparison with the grills on or off.
I think you reversed the graph colors. I think you meant the other way around.
No, that's
It looks
correct.
better with the grill on. That doesn't make sense.
It looks better with the grill on. Yes. Doesn't
No.
always. Gene, doesn't always. The grill, when a grill is on, oh wait, is that right? Did I mislabel that?
That's what I'm saying. It looks better with the grill on.
I might have mislabeled this now that I think about it.
I told you that yesterday.
I had other things to do.
Well, you're only looking at on axis too. So the real problem with grills is the diffraction that they cause off axis because of the frame structure itself. So either way,
it's not doing much. The grill's not doing much.
They both look good. So you're not losing high frequencies, at least on axis. Just realize off axis, you're going to see more disadvantages with the grill on.
I'll have to double check this, and maybe in the product description, you can add that. Here's what that graph really meant.
Yeah, let me know, and I'll put a correction in after we do the live stream. It's no big deal.
I meant to, maybe I blanked, but maybe I'm right. I don't know. Maybe I mislabeled the graphs when I was actually taking the measurements. So I don't know. I think that you're right though. I think that when you look at this, the green curve is with the grill on. So I think that Gene is right and I'm wrong, and I stand corrected.
Okay, let me just put a note here. Grill on is the green curve.
I think, but I'm not 100% certain. It's hard to be certain, right? Because I measured this thing like quite a while ago. I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago or something.
Understood. No worries. I mean, it looks good from what we're seeing here, but the bottom line is if you don't have kids or you don't have anybody that's going to poke a hole in your tweeter, keep the grills off. I think they look better with the grills off anyway. Those grills are kind of pedestrian to begin with.
When you say poke a hole in a tweeter, normally that's a problem with speakers, right? Where people like push in the dome, but with these,
Yeah, in
that
this case,
tweeter will poke a hole in you if you try to
they're
push
gonna
it right.
poke a hole in your finger. I like that
Yeah.
actually.
But the problem is the mid-range driver is pretty that turbine material is like it's a foam, right? It's pretty light and it's more vulnerable than the quite a bit
Oh
more
yeah,
vulnerable.
good point. Good
Yes.
point.
It's a stiff
So,
foam, but it is foam.
so we're looking at the impedance graph. Now, this is the funny thing. When I asked Scott, the designer of Polk, I said, when we did the unveiling of the series, we did a virtual press event for them. I asked him, I go, are these towers 8 ohm? He goes, they're 4 ohm. Most companies lie about 8 ohm towers. They don't make 8 ohm towers. I freaking love the fact that he brought that up because that's true. Most multi-driver towers, multiple woofers in parallel with a mid-range and a tweeter, they're really going to be between 4 to 6 ohms. You just can't change the laws of physics other than fudging the spec. And the thing about Polk is they're honest about it. They're giving you the impedance from 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz, which is an IEC standard. They're giving you the anechoic sensitivity rating rather than measuring at 1/8 space like Klipsch does. No offense to Klipsch, but come on, guys, you could do better with your sensitivity ratings. You already have an efficient speaker. Why the hell do you have to make it look more efficient than it is? So, looking at this impedance graph, this by IEC standards,
It's 4 ohms.
yeah,
No, unquestionably. But it's not a hard 4 ohm. If you look
no,
at the
actually, I mean, they could have called it a 6 ohm speaker and it still meets 80% requirement to get this 8, because 80% of 6 ohms is like 4 point something ohms. So
I
it's
don't know if
close.
they would have been able to do that. Looking at this,
Yeah,
80%.
4.8 ohms. It would have been a stretch.
This is a 4 ohm speaker, and it's not hard. If you look at the like the nadir of the impedance, which is like what I don't know, 90 hertz or so, the phase angle isn't terrible. You could drive these with any AVR, except maybe they're really cheap. If you wanted to blast, most consumer speakers are like this. If you for 4 ohm speaker, most consumer AVRs will drive, right? But maybe if you have a cheaper one with like a flimsy, like amplifier and a flimsy power supply, you don't want to blast. You don't want to run it at a high level for a long period of time.
Well, they do have a pretty steep phase angle change for, from the
At the
60
port
hertz.
tuning frequency, but that's a higher impedance, right?
Yeah, why is that so asymmetric like that?
I think it's a consequence of the port. So the port is like, they have that crazy like export thing, right?
Right.
And when that first, like so there's the saddle part of the low end of response, and normally those peaks in the saddle are kind of evenish, right?
Yep.
But when the lower saddle is like, or when the upper saddle is the lower, no, the upper
It's
peak,
underdamped,
yeah,
right?
the higher peak of the saddle is like lower than the lower peak. That means that the resonant frequency of the drivers is lower than the resonant frequency of the cabinet. So I think it's a little bit underdamped, like
Yeah.
the porting, right? The enclosure and the whole speaker, right? It just means that the cabinet has a higher resonant frequency than the bass drivers. You can see here another thing to notice here on this graph is that you can tell where the port tuning frequency is. It's at the like kind of
30,
the nadir
34
of that
hertz.
the saddle curve. Yeah, it seems to be right in the mid 30s, right? And which makes sense from the low frequency measurements that we saw.
Yeah. Do me a favor going forward. Make the phase and impedance different colors on the graph, not shaded
I
green.
would love to. This is what REW spits out. I use REW to produce this graph, right? And REW, it's supposed to be a different shade. It might be a little hard to tell here, right?
Yeah.
It's like the phase is a lighter green, but the
Yep.
problem is if you change it, it makes the colors even closer. Like if I change the colors, right?
Can you
Like
make that phase dotted line so you don't see it as pronounced?
I don't know. I don't think
Hmm.
so. Maybe I could
Matt would know. Matt Pose would know. We got to ask him.
maybe I don't know if he knows REW's graphing features that well, but I probably could have used a color that's a little bit. You know how REW works. It's a feature of REW, right?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
I don't
All
even
right.
think this graph is the one on the website. I think the one that we have in the review itself is.
So the one thing I would caution people with looking at this impedance graph, Don't use a budget Class D amplifier on a speaker like this. A lot of those budget Class D amps, especially like the older generation Pioneer receivers that first came out with the first generation ICE modules, they did not like driving 4 ohm speakers above 3 kilohertz. They would just limit the power. They just didn't have the right filter on them. So Class D is fine if it's a good Class D. If it's a load invariant Class D, like if you look at the measurements we do on Class D amplifiers, I always measure at various impedances to make sure the frequency response is constant. If you choose a Class D amplifier that doesn't have a constant frequency response, James learned this the hard way when he had a shitty Class D amplifier he was using to measure speakers, and he saw different response curves based on the loudspeaker, and we figured out it was the amplifier itself. So I'm just giving people a caution not to make you guys worry too much.
Well, that only happened like about 15 kilohertz. Like it wasn't a big. I mean, it wasn't. It was. I should have been using a better amp, and I do.
Yeah, but it's out there. It's
Yeah.
the point of the matter is when I see usually you see a speaker's impedance rise with frequency. In this case, it's not doing that. It's very flat, above 4 kilohertz. Use a good amplifier. Use a if you're buying a speaker like this, use a mid to high end flagship receiver to power it. I mean, it's better if you're buying a speaker like this, give it some good power.
No, I would say even if you're using kind of a mid end, like say like a I don't know, $600 or $700 receiver. If you're just driving these two speakers, it'll probably handle it just fine. And those receivers aren't going to be using Class D amplifiers. So
Right. Yeah, you should be okay.
okay, so here's a graph of the near. I don't normally post this measurement or these sort of measurements because it's so prone to like being
Yeah.
taken out of like context and misinterpreted. And
Yeah,
so
because the levels they're not accounted, they're not matched for the
exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly, and it can't be so like it just is just to show what the individual drivers are doing, and you can see the red. Obviously, the red graph is of a tweeter, and I get like the microphone for this technique. I just put the microphone like an inch or two away from the driver
Yeah.
surfaces, right? So that's a nice flat response from the tweeter, and then going the green graph is obviously the mid-range driver. It's nice and flat over that. It's such a large bandwidth, right? It is a beautifully performing driver.
Yeah, it's clean.
Yeah, it is.
Really
It is
clean.
very nice, and then there's a roll off
Like you
there.
said, if you would see breakup modes, it would be like in the 4 to 5 kilohertz range. You would see resonances, and you're not seeing that. It's just a gradual decline in frequency response.
And that's a combination of both the driver itself and the crossover circuit. And I think a lot of it is in the driver engineering. They engineered the driver so well that they didn't need some aggressive crossover slope, right?
So and the cool thing too, look at the port. You don't see another resonance peak occurring in the higher frequencies.
Yeah, that's what I wanted really to bring people's attention to in this graph. If you do a close measurements of or near field measurements of ports, you will see big time like harmonic spikes. So you obviously the first hump there at like what is that 30 to 40 hertz, right?
Yeah.
That's your main resonance, and that's what the port is supposed to be doing. Everything else above that, after that decline isn't intended. But here we see normally what you see is some big spikes, right? That might be like 6 dB down from the main
Mhm.
resonance, right? Or something like that. But that still can really get it in the measured response. But here there's nothing, right? And that export system that Polk uses, it's supposed to reduce those like extra like harmonics by something like 14 dB, right? And it does so, but using these things called eigenfilters, and the eigenfilters actually create anti-resonances, like anti-resonances that target those harmonics, right? So it's a very clever system, and it's really cool, and like it works well. It works really well, right? Better than I've ever seen in any other speaker. So that's
There
why
you
I
go.
posted this. Yeah, it's really
Yeah, the
cool.
port works. It's not a gimmick, and it's like you said, it's die-cast metal. It's not just a plastic port. It's actually built really well. It looks cool too.
Yeah, that's just the base. The base
The
is, and
base,
that's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that makes a good like low center of gravity because it's a heavy piece. And there's the bottom of the base. I just thought I would like the end of the speaker, right? It has the
Mhm.
Polk name kind of like formed in there, for the mold, and yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks kind of cool. Anyways, that's these speakers. I I think like for the $1,000 price range,
per speaker.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, per speaker, these might be my new faves. My previous faves were the Paradigm 800Fs,
Yeah, the
the
Premier
Premier
800F. Yeah.
800Fs, and those are really good. And those do, I think, do give these some competition, right? But if I had to buy one, I might go for the Polks. The Paradigms are very stiff competition.
Well, the Polk definitely probably has more bass output with those dual eights. That's
I
one
have
advantage.
to think it would have greater bass headroom. So I mean, if you were going to go without a subwoofer, these are I would go for these over the Paradigm. The Paradigm's advantages, I think it looks a little nicer. I think it has better directivity control up to a higher frequency because it has like a waveguide on a dome. The waveguide isn't very, it's a shallow waveguide, it's a small one, but it does, I think, preserve the directivity to a higher frequency. Um, it's a really good speaker with a really flat response. I don't know. It's situational which one you really want, but
Mhm.
man,
One
these are really
advantage
good.
that Paradigm has in that series over the Polk Reserve is they have a center channel with a WTMW driver topology, as opposed to the Reserve series that just has a horizontal MTM.
That's another thing that I wanted to mention that the Paradigms have a better, the Premier has a better center channel.
The
That line.
500C is and the 600Cs are just excellent center channels. They
Yeah,
really
those are
are.
really good. And the Reserve series for Polk, they only have MTM, and there's going to be real compromises in the MTM design versus the three-way. And I've measured that 500C. That's a really good center speaker. It's
The
really good.
Paradigm, yeah.
Yeah, the Paradigm. Yeah, I'm just saying the Paradigm
Yeah.
Premier Center is
So
really
so
good.
let me just add a caveat because I know people flip out when they say, "Oh my god, I can't use an MTM as a horizontal center." You can,
You
as
just don't
long
want to
as
be
you're
too
not
far off
you
axis.
don't wanna be more than about 15, 20 degrees off axis, and
Even
my
20 might be put you in a serious
yeah,
null.
but my argument is in most cases, if you're sitting more than 20 degrees off axis, you're usually sitting on a sidewall, and at that point, you've compromised your whole movie theater experience because you're sitting probably close to a surround speaker. You're off axis, you're not getting good imaging from your main speakers, and your picture quality isn't as good when you're sitting that far. So try to if you have a choice between one long couch or 2 rows of seating, go with the 2 rows of seating or just keep away from a sidewall in almost any circumstance you possibly can. We recommend that.
I do mention the review. Okay, while there are like center speakers for the Reserve series, I don't think those center speakers are worthy of the R700s, right? So in a review, I tell people go for the Legend Center. That's a really, really good center speaker. The Legend L400, which is like the Polk's, the upper series, that's a truly good center. It's using a lot of the same technology, the ring radiator, that power port design that is not sophisticated as this power port, and it has the same turbine cone, right? It's an expensive center, but it's worth it, and these speakers deserve it. That would be a great LCR setup, a
The
really good
other
one.
option too, if you can't afford that, because the L400 is like 1,500 bucks, just get the bookshelf version of the speaker and keep it vertical and put it behind underneath your TV. I
Yeah,
mean,
that
that's
you could do that if you have room for it. If
yeah.
you have room for it. I wish there was a way to get like a nice narrow center speaker that didn't have all this like MTM loading, but it's hard to do, right?
Well, Paradigm does it with the Paradigm's new Founder series. They have a, center channel, an LCR that has a concentric driver for the mid
Sure, I
receiver.
have that downstairs. I should have brought off here. No, yeah, but it's even that though. That center is like the mid-range driver is 7 inch. It's a 7 inch cone, so it's
Yeah.
not a very short mid-range, and it
Well, they
doesn't
did
really
that for
solve that problem.
sensitivity because a lot of these concentric drivers are a 5-inch driver with a tiny little magnet tweeter in the middle, and they just don't have a high sensitivity or a lot of output capability. So I can understand why Paradigm went that route with
Oh, I
the
measured the sensitivity. Yeah, it's very much above average for the 70 LCR is a center speaker talking. Well, there's the larger one too. I don't know what that's called right offhand, right? But yeah, it's a high sensitivity center speaker as opposed to Polk's center speaker. Their Legend one is not that high in sensitivity. I think I measured it maybe 86, 7. I don't know. You can double check, but it's a good enough. It's more
yeah,
than
it's
good
good
enough.
enough. Yeah.
It's a really good center speaker. So like
Well, I mean, the cool thing of the takeaway here is Polk just came out swinging with a tower that's about $2,000 a pair that will beat almost anything out there from what we've seen. You've got really good bass extension down to the 30 hertz range, 35 hertz in a room. It plays plenty loud. It's got decent sensitivity. It's got very wide dispersion with the only beaming that happens is above like 10 kilohertz or so, which is not that big of a deal because there's not a lot of program content above that high anyway. And overall, and the port is what makes this thing so clean. You don't have any port chuffing. You don't have any secondary resonances that you often get with budget speaker with ported speakers. You've got a real enclosure in the center in the mid range, as opposed to a cheap plastic cup that you see on some budget speakers for the mid range. And the cabinet's really inert. It weighs 80 pounds. I mean, that's substantial for a product of that size and that price. And the veneer, or it's not a veneer, it's a vinyl wrap, but it looks pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's you'd have to be close to it to see the, to even detect that it's not real. It's pretty good. It looks like it's a nice looking speaker. It is.
Someone's asking how wide that speaker is. I'm going to guess if that's an 8-inch driver, then the width is probably, realistically, it's a 7-inch diameter. So I'm probably saying it's about 8 or 9 inches wide, that speaker, right?
Yeah, I don't know. You have to check the specs. I didn't memorize
It's on,
that.
you know what? We have the review. It's on our, if you go to audioholics.com and you go to the left side of the site and you click on the review and you go to the specs, which I'm doing now, and it has the dimensions. They are 45 inches tall. Oh, they're wider than I thought. 12.6 inches wide and 16.9 inches deep. So that might be a true 8-inch driver. It's not like a fudged 8-inch driver.
I think it's true. I think it's a real. I mean, I don't know the cone. I think I might have measured the cone size, but I don't remember what it was. But it's a
Yeah.
big, it's a beefy driver for sure. Yeah, it's a really good speaker. I think there's other good speakers in this price point. There's like I said, the Paradigm, the SVS is Prime Pinnacle is a decent speaker. Revell has the Concerto F36, right? Which is surely a good speaker, but I haven't heard it or measured that one
I
myself.
doubt the Revels have that kind of bass output though, because
There's no
the
way.
cheaper Revels are sealed. They're not
No,
ported.
I don't think it's no. That one has to be ported, and it has 3 6s for the 6.5.
I saw a Revel speaker. I went to a showroom in Tampa and I looked, there was no port on them. They were towers. And I think it was their budget tower. I was shocked to see that they were sealed.
Are you sure that the port wasn't at the bottom? It was on the
Yep.
bottom. Maybe. I don't know. I think that it's probably a pretty good tower speaker. I think that would be ported. There's also the monoprice one. The monoprice is $1,000 tower, and that would be pretty good, I think, but I haven't measured it. But there is really good competition. But man, these are so good. These are just like, yeah, they're just.
Well, I saw the measurements that Eric did on the monoprice one, and the waveguide does have some resonances in it that you're not going to get with a speaker like this. So.
Oh, I'm talking about the THX
Oh,
towers.
the
not the
THX
Encore.
ones.
The Encore ones. I have the Encore towers, and I have measured them. They do measure very well. I think Aaron has he had the bookshelf ones, not the tower ones. I have the tower ones. Those are good, but that's a subject for. Those aren't in this price class. Those are like $400 each.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
not the same. Yeah.
So the question about someone just asked, I'll put it up here. Since these are not rear ported, can you place them close to a front wall?
I don't think the ports were ever a thing. I think that's kind of a myth that, oh, well, this rear ported speaker shouldn't be placed next to a wall. Well, if you look at the kind of like SPL produced or the frequencies produced by the port, it doesn't make a difference really. If you're putting the port, if it's front ported, lower ported, or rear ported, if you're putting it right next to a wall, that it actually inhibits airflow. Yeah, it makes a difference. But otherwise, it doesn't make too much of a difference. It's not going to affect the sound very much. What we'll do is our front and bottom ported speakers. What we'll do, we'll mask chuffing, but this isn't going to have a problem with chuffing.
Well, that port doesn't have a problem with chuffing, and also the fact that it's downfiring acts as a low pass filter itself, so that even helps more if there was a problem with chuffing. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Someone just posted that the Revel, wrong one. The Revel F36 is ported, but it's 3 dB points, 50 hertz. Yeah, so the Polks definitely have a bass advantage.
Yeah, you're gonna want to use a subwoofer with the F36. These don't need a sub. They don't really, unless you really want to blast like movie.
This is just not a strong point on Revel speakers, unless you get to their flagship models. They go for sensitivity more than extension.
It's a reasonable trade-off. I mean, there's pros and cons to all these approaches. Like we always say, there's trade-offs in everything in loudspeakers, right? And that's their approach, and it's good. You want to use a subwoofer with those, especially if you're like watching movies or listening to music with really deep bass. And these
Yep.
don't really need that. But if you want really strong bass, right? Yeah, you're gonna want to use a subwoofer even with these. So like, it's all a matter. It's a matter of like your particular situation.
Well, I linked up the full written review for that James did on the R700s. If you go to the description of this video, you click on the link to Audioholics. Don't forget, we have an editorial site and we pour out a lot of editorial content there. And I hope you guys are reading it, because at the end of the day, that's our bread and butter. That's what we love to do. We like to report full test reports written down so you don't forget what you're going to say on a camera, and you can go much more in detail when you do it written. So please take the time, look at his review, look at the explanation of the graphs, and then you can decide whether or not this is the right speaker for you. James, appreciate you coming out here. And by the way, it is now Christmas Eve, so Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to everybody that's watching. We appreciate your support, that you're here on a holiday enjoying audio experiences with us.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Awesome. Guys, don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us if you want to ask questions or suggest video topics. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like this video. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.